start a new study, and this one's probably going to be for the long haul. All right, so I hope you're okay with that. Um, and just remember, you asked for this. Okay, so you're going to have to stick with it. Um, we're going to start Revelation tonight, and tonight is really just going to focus on kind of the big picture. I can tell you how the book is laid out. You know, I'm big into the literary design. I like to see that visually. It helps me kind of see a map for the book. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm also going to tell you the different approaches, the way that different people and scholars approach this book, the approach that they use to interpret the book. All of my notes, obviously, as usual, are in the Faith Life app. If you want to follow along there, I've got some slides that we'll go through too. Um, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the literary design. We're going to look at the different approaches. We're going to talk about, when was this book written, who wrote it, all those kind of big picture things are what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, we are going to cover the first 3 verses, but not in detail. We're actually going to really dig into chapter 1 next week, and we're going to go word by word, line by line through chapter 1. We're going to go really slow in the first part of this book, and we may speed up when we start getting into the visions and things like that, because if we go verse by verse, line by line through everything, then we'll be in this for years. I don't know how long this series will be. So what we're going to spend next week, hopefully we'll get through chapter 1 next week. Just kind of depends. We'll see, and then we'll go through the 7 churches, one at a time. So we'll have 7 weeks worth of just going through each church that this was written to. So that's kind of how this is going to go. So it's going to be a long series, and we're going to be at this for a while. Here's what we'll do. Let me just dig in, but I want you to stick with me till the end. The end is where I really want to tell you what we're going to do with this study. Okay, so let me give you some big picture stuff, and then we're going to kind of zoom in on one thing at the end tonight, and I'll give you some homework like I normally do, and then we'll go to Q&A after that. Okay, sound good? All right. So Revelation is, and I know this is really busy. It's really hard to get all this on one slide. Okay, so this is kind of how the book's organized. So it is a letter to 7 churches. All right. So a lot of people maybe don't think of Revelation that way. And by the way, rule number 1. Rule number 1. It's Revelation, not Revelations. Okay? So, if you see somebody post about Revelations and they're acting like an expert, they didn't even get the title right, all right? So they might have missed some things, okay? So anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine. But anyway, so it's a letter. It has a prologue at the beginning and it has an epilogue at the end. It is written in letter form. So it is framed by 2 sections that clearly say this is a letter. Now, it is the most unique letter in the New Testament, but it is a letter, okay? So it was a letter sent to some people, all right? So it starts off with this prologue and a greeting, just like all the New Testament letters do. In Paul's letters, he's like, hey, I'm Paul, and I'm writing to you people in Ephesus or Galatia or whatever, and he'll usually say something like grace and peace to you through our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, the Revelation starts the same way. So, and then he gives us a theme. That's in verse 7. We'll cover that next week. And then he gets into the first vision. Now, I think you've heard me say this about the Gospel of John before. And John wrote John, and John wrote Revelation. So it is very similar what he's doing in these 2 books. What he does in the Gospel of John is the first chapter gives you all of these words and phrases and themes that he's going to pull into every story that he tells in the Gospel of John. I love the Gospel of John. It's like a treasure hunt. You read chapter 1 and then you go looking for those words and phrases to see what he's doing with it. So he does that in the Gospel. He also does it in Revelation. Chapter 1 teaches you how to read the rest of the book. We're gonna dig into that next week, so just kind of hang on to that. But the first vision happens in chapter 1. It's the vision of the Son of Man, or Jesus. Um, and then 2 and 3, you've got the letters to the churches, and that reads. It's a little bit easier to read because it makes a lot of sense. There's not these crazy seven-headed beasts and stuff in there. It's just some practical stuff to these 7 different churches. And then it really takes off into all these visions. So from chapter 4 to the end of the book, it's all of these strange visions that he's being shown. And the reason why I put this section in red is because those are all about judgment. So these are all visions about judgment on someone. Okay, and we'll talk about that when we get there. And then at the end, I put that in green just because that's your favorite part of the book. That's where it gets good, right? I mean, all of it's good, but you know what I mean. It's pretty grim until you get to chapter 20, and then it's like, wow, this is getting better now. So this is kind of how the book is organized. There's a lot more to it than that. That's just a way of me getting it on one slide so you can see the whole book at one time. And we'll come back to that and use it throughout the series. Okay. All right. Well, let me tell you 5 approaches to Revelation, and these are 5 different approaches, meaning the people in these 5 camps disagree with each other. Okay, and there's different branches in each approach where they disagree with each other, and this shouldn't surprise you. We're talking about Revelation, not Revelations. Revelation, right? Okay, so here are the 5 approaches to Revelation, and I'll try to describe them. But usually when we get to something like this, you kind of get nervous because you're like, wait a minute, which one are you going to pick? Just forget that, all right? I'm just telling you this so you know about it. We're not really going to focus on this in this series, okay? So you can kind of let your guard down. All right, he's not going to try to convince us of something. We're not really, I'm not concerned with how people approach the book. I'm concerned with what the book is saying. All right, we'll come back to that at the end. All right, so here are the 5 approaches. The first one is the historicist approach. And basically how they come to Revelation, how they kind of see through it, is they think Revelation is describing history. That, there's certain visions that are describing one period of church history. Then you move to the next chapter, that's the next, 100 years of church history or whatever. So they interpret the book in that way. So they would point to a certain chapter and say, that kind of looks like this period of history. Does that make sense, the historicist approach? So it's kind of like they're looking at a timeline of history from the 1st century to now, and they're trying to take pieces of Revelation and put it on the timeline somewhere. Does that make sense? Okay. And I'm being very general about this. So if you're like a Revelation expert online watching this, I'm going to really tick you off because I'm not going to be as precise as you want me to be. I'm just trying to give you an overview. The second view, and these are not in any particular order, but the futurist approach is probably the most popular approach in America, in the Western type thing. It is somewhat popular in other parts of the world, but it's mostly popular here. The futurist approach is ancient. Now, the historicist approach is fairly new, like it's maybe a few centuries old. The futurist approach is really old. There were people very early in church history who were reading Revelation saying this is something apparently way off in our future. Some of them thought that. Some of them thought it's in our future, but it's like next week. You can find people in every century of church history who thought the events of Revelation were about to happen like right now. Kind of like you do today, right? Okay, you're going to have to lighten up a little bit. Pretty much every generation thinks it's about to all happen right now. I mean, if you just go read the books written. I mean, back in the 80s, it was really big. Hal Lindsey wrote his book, and people were predicting and setting dates, and then Y2K was the next big thing, and then it was 2012 because, the Mayans, they said like 2012 the world was going to end, and a bunch of people were trying to connect that with the Bible. That's been going on for 2,000 years, okay, almost 2,000 years. So the futurist approach is one approach to it. It's very old, it's very ancient. The preterist approach is another approach that is also very ancient, um, and it's just as old as the futurist approach, if not older. The preterist approach, it says that many of the events in Revelation are referring to first century events, but the whole book is not fulfilled yet. So that's the preterist approach. Sometimes it's called the partial preterist approach. They would say a lot of Revelation has happened, but the parts at the end hadn't yet. Okay, so that's the preterist approach. The hyper preterist approach, they think everything in Revelation has already happened, that we are living in the new creation right now. And the way that they do that is they say all those things were spiritual, not literal, physical. The new creation spiritual, not physical. So that's how they get around that. Most scholars would call that view heresy. And I'm going to say if it ain't heresy, it's close. It depends on which hyperpreterist you're talking to. Some of them think that the resurrection that's supposed to happen to all of us, right at the end, we're going to get resurrected and in judgment and new creation. They say that that's not actually going to happen, that you're not actually going to be physically resurrected. That's what the hyperpreterists say, and that's when you've crossed the line of heresy, because clearly all the apostles and Jesus himself and places in the Old Testament say you're literally going to be risen from the dead and get a new body. All right? So we will not be covering anything about hyperpreterism in this series because I don't buy it at all. Okay? So everybody feel better now? Okay? And then there's this last view, and it's not very popular. It's the newest view, really, as far as I can tell, called the idealist approach. And basically what they say is that Revelation is just this big symbolic thing about how history goes. That nations rise and fall, and good things happen and bad things happen, and it's just going to keep cycling that way until the end. So that's the idealist approach. It's probably the hardest approach to figure out because it's not very clear. And it's kind of the new kid on the block, and it's not very popular, and there's probably good reasons for that. It doesn't make very much sense. So anyway, that's the way people pretty much come to Revelation. That's how they interpret the book, is in one of these 5 views. So there that is. So just so you're aware of that. Now, if you've studied anything about Revelation or Googled it even once, you've heard things about premillennial and postmillennial and amillennial and stuff like that. We're not really going to get into that until we get to chapter 20 when we get to the millennium, the 1,000 years. And even then, I don't really want to focus too much on all these different views. I think if you're not careful, you'll pick a view and then start reading the text, and that's backwards. Okay, so can we all just agree? Let's not do that. Let's not pick a view, whether it's any of these or a millennial thing. Don't pick a view and then read the Bible. Read the Bible and let it tell you what your view is. Make sense? Okay? So what's our approach going to be? Well, our approach is going to be the Bible approach. Okay? That's what we're going to do. So here's how we're going to approach it. We're going to let the text of Scripture speak for itself. Okay, so if the text says something, we're going to say, all right, that's what it says. Okay, now what do we do with it? But we've got to admit what it says first. Yes? So we're going to let it speak for itself. And the text, meaning the words of Revelation, the text, not a particular view, is going to be our authority. So the text is our authority. It's the Word of God, right? Okay, so it is the authority. I'm not the authority. You're not the authority. Somebody who wrote a book about Revelation's not the authority. Somebody on YouTube's not the authority. Revelation, the text itself is the authority. All right, so we're not going to take a view and then look through our view at the text. We're going to start with the text. Because the text, in its original context, tells us what the meaning is. We have to start there. Okay, we can't start what we think it means and then try to read it in. Okay, make sense? All right, so that's going to be our approach. We're just going to focus on the Bible. That's what we're going to do. All right, what was the next part here? Okay, how about we start reading Revelation? Sound good? All right. Good. That's what I'm more excited about than all that other stuff I just told you. Okay. Um, here's how it reads. Apocalypsis Jesus Christos. That's the Greek of the first three words. First three words are apocalypse, Jesus Christ. Okay? So here's what that means. The word revelation is our English word, but the actual word here is apocalypsis or apocalypse. Now, our modern idea, when we hear apocalypse, we immediately think end of the world or some devastating event. It was an apocalyptic earthquake, something like that. That's how we think about the word, but that word is not an English word that we get to define. It's a Greek word that's ancient. And the Greek word means revealing. That's why we translate it revelation, right? We don't translate it the end of the world by Jesus Christ. That's not what it's saying. It's saying this thing you're about to read is going to reveal or explain or show you something about Jesus. You probably haven't thought about Revelation this way. You thought, well, this is a book about events leading up to the end of the world. The first three words says, this book is about Jesus. Okay? This book's going to teach you something, reveal something to you about Jesus. All right? So we good? We good? Make sense? This is good news because it means we're going to learn something about Jesus if we read this book. It's good, right? So the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him, who's him? Jesus. Okay, so God gave Jesus something in order to show to his servants. So God the Father gave the Son something to show the Son's servants something. See it? Okay. I know this is not life-changing stuff, but it's very important. God's given a revelation of Jesus to Jesus' servants about the things that must soon take place. We're going to talk about soon next week. That makes you want to come back, doesn't it? Or maybe not. We're going to have to come back to that next time. And we will. We're going to spend plenty of time on that. So there's going to be, this thing reveals Jesus, and it was given by God to Jesus, then to his servants. Okay? Now, he made it known, and the Greek word here, and I wish they would just translate it right. The Greek word here is the word for signs. Signs. John uses this word repeatedly in John's gospel. It's used a lot in Revelation as well. John's gospel actually really highlights 7 signs that Jesus did. The whole book is kind of told in that framework of these 7 signs, because he tells you in John's gospel, this was at the wedding at Cana when he turns the water into Welch's. It was wine. Anyway, John tells you this was the first of Jesus' signs that he did. And then you'll read along, and then Jesus does a miracle or something, and he'll say, this was the second. And then after that, he stops counting for you. He expects you to count. That's what John does. So what that tells us about the way John writes is he's not putting the cookies on the bottom shelf. He's going to make you work for it in his gospel and certainly in Revelation. But the word here is he signed it. He gave signs is the way that this book is going to reveal something. Signs. Now, what does a road sign do? Let's imagine you're driving on the road and there's a curve, big sharp curve. Right before you get to that curve, there's usually a sign that has like an arrow that's saying the road's about to go that way. Heads up. Okay, the sign is not the curve. The sign points to the curve. The sign is a symbol of the literal curve. Make sense? This is very important. If you don't get this, you'll totally misunderstand this book. Revelation is a book of signs that point to something real. The sign is not the thing. The sign is a vision with all these symbols and stuff that point to the real thing. Make sense? This is how apocalyptic literature worked. Now, we're not very familiar with it because we don't do this. We don't write this way. This was extremely common in ancient times, not just in the Jewish world, but especially in the Jewish world. Apocalyptic literature was very common. Okay? So let's talk about this apocalyptic literature for a minute. It's not just in Revelation. This isn't new. Okay, when you're reading your Bible and you get to Revelation, it's like, wow, this is weird. There's weird stuff just like this sprinkled throughout your Bible. Okay, now, if you remember, and I was supposed to remind you, and I didn't remember to remind you to remember, that if you read Daniel, I don't know if you ever read Daniel, but it reads kind of like Revelation does. There are these weird visions that Daniel has, or that like Nebuchadnezzar has. He has a dream and he's freaked out and he can't get anybody to tell him what it means. And he goes and gets Daniel, right? And Daniel can interpret dreams. So, if you remember in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of this big statue, right? And it's got different types of, each part of the statue is a different type of material. And Daniel interprets it for him because the angel has told Daniel how to do this. And he says, yeah, these are different kingdoms that are coming. Okay? So the vision of the big statue is a symbol of actual kingdoms. So you wouldn't read that vision in Daniel and think a giant statue is going to walk on the earth. Right? And the reason why you don't is because in Daniel, the angel interprets things for you. And he does that sometimes in Revelation, but not often. You have to know how to read Daniel if you're really going to understand Revelation, because it's a book of signs. It's apocalyptic literature. Okay, so Daniel's an example of that. Isaiah has visions in his book. The intertestament period had a few apocalyptic books. Enoch was one of them. There's quite a few. And they were apocalyptic literature things written by Christians after the writing of the New Testament, which we don't consider to be scripture, but it does read in the same way. Okay, so apocalyptic literature is what we're reading. It's a letter that contains a bunch of apocalyptic visions. Okay, we good? All right, we'll make sure I make sense. I've studied this a lot, and sometimes I get ahead, and I think you know things that I know, and I don't want to get ahead of you. So, all right, so he made it known. There's these signs that he's going to show. And he's going to show them by sending an angel to his servant John. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate about which John this is. There's scholars on both sides of this. Some think it's the Apostle John. And everyone in early church history thought it was the Apostle John. The people who knew John said it was John, the Apostle John. But there's a lot of scholars, especially nowadays, that they think it's a different John. It's not the Apostle John. And they have all these reasons for it. And quite frankly, I think they're all wrong. This is the Apostle John. It reads very much like John's Gospel in many places. It's obviously the Apostle John. Okay? So that's my view. You can disagree with that. It really doesn't matter because it doesn't change what the book says. But it matters to me because if the Apostle John wrote it, I can trust it. If it's some John, we don't know who he is. I don't know if I want to be reading this. Make sense? Okay. So he's given it to John, who bore witness to the Word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ. That word witness, if you're in a paper Bible, just put a box around that. That's a pattern. It's going to come up through the whole book. Okay? We'll dig into that pattern stuff next week. The other thing you need to know about this before we get to verse 3, Revelation is loaded with the Old Testament. Loaded. Let me tell you how loaded it is. One particular scholar who's written an entire book just on this topic has identified 579 Old Testament connections in Revelation. Okay, so John is pointing back to the Old Testament 579 times. What does that tell you? It tells you you might need to know some Old Testament. And if you don't, you might get it wrong. Okay? So it's very important. And if you compare that to Matthew's gospel, there's like 96 connections to the Old Testament. It's a big difference. Okay, so what that tells us is we're reading a book. It's apocalyptic, which is also in our Old Testament. And then there's all these Old Testament connections. What it means is we need the Bible to interpret the Bible when we come to this book. And by the way, when you come to any book of the Bible, you need to use the Bible to interpret itself. Okay? All right. What else here? I got ahead of myself. Okay, let's talk about verse 3 because this is the encouraging part. Okay, so if you kind of drifted off, to come back to us. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy. Okay, so it's a prophecy. It's apocalyptic, it's got signs in it, and it's a prophecy. See how John's he's giving you all the clues? This is what I'm writing you about. This is what kind of literature this is. This is the kind of things you're going to read. They're signs. Don't take it all literally. They're symbols, right? And it's a prophecy, meaning this is going to help you understand. So you're blessed if you read it, and blessed are those who hear it being read and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near. We'll come back to near next week. We'll get there soon enough. It's a good joke. Yeah. Y'all laughed at that one. Sunday, y'all didn't laugh at my joke, and I had to laugh at myself. Okay, so what's going on here? Think about what John has just said. Okay, this isn't an angel talking to John. This is John telling you this under inspiration of the Spirit, but it's John. All right? You're going to be blessed if you read this book out loud and you listen to it and you do what it says. Now, in the modern world, if we were to write that verse, it would probably sound like this. Confused is the one who reads this book. Right? Because there's all these, I just showed you, there's 5 different major approaches to this. There's 3 different millennial views about how to even read one section of one chapter in the book. And there's scores of books written on that one little section. Right? So there's all this confusion and debate and all this stuff. But that's not what John says. John says, you're going to be blessed if you read this and then do what it says. Interesting. Right? Now, the cool thing about this is a beatitude. You know, Jesus had some of those beatitudes. It's how he started his Sermon on the Mount. Blessed is the one who, and he has 9 of them. John's going to have 7. Surprise, 7, right? He's going to have 7 beatitudes that he's just kind of sprinkled through the book. Okay? So we'll identify, they're all listed in your notes. You can go look them up when you want to. So there's going to be 7 of these blessings. Blessed is the one who. And then there'll be a description. This is the first one. And he starts right out the gate. Look, you're going to be blessed. This is apocalyptic. And by the way, all of his readers would know how to read that. They're very familiar with it. It's a prophecy. You're going to be blessed if you take this serious and you read it and you do what it's telling you. The reason why I'm focusing on that and putting so much emphasis on it is that's where we've got to get to. We've got to get to the point where we're the kind of people who can read this book and enjoy it and be blessed by it. And you're probably thinking, I don't think I'm going to get there. You know, the 7-headed beast and people being killed and blood so deep it, horses are wading through it. How am I going to be blessed by that? Well, you're going to have to not be so focused on all the negative sounding stuff. You're going to have to be focused on the message that's being told through all of that. Because John said, and God told him to say, you'll be blessed. Okay, so this book is a blessing. It literally is a blessing. That's not a symbol. That's not a sign. It's not apocalyptic. It's literal. You're going to be blessed. Okay, so what we're about to do for who knows how long on Wednesday night is we're just going to be blessed with this book. It's going to be great. Can you smile? I mean, seriously, I'm being dead serious. This book is awesome. First of all, it's God's word. And second, the message of this book, though there is a lot of crazy stuff, especially in, like this part. Okay? Yeah, this is judgment time. All right? Some bad things are going to go down, but they're going to happen to people who flat out hate Jesus and hate Jesus's people. All right? But if you get hung up on that, you're going to miss this part and this part. And if you miss this part, you miss the whole thing. Because the new creation is what this book is trying to stir you up for. It's trying to say, hey, you're going to be blessed if you read this, because when you get to the end of this thing, you're going to see why you needed to read it. Because when we finally get there, and I mean that in a couple ways, when we finally get there in the study, and when we actually finally get there, it's going to be what we've always wanted. A place with no sin, a place where Jesus is physically, visibly present with us forever. That's the part you can't miss. If you get hung up on the beast and all this other stuff, and we get hung up on arguments about that, we will miss the point of the book. The book is not to argue about it. The book is to bless you. Amen? All right? Okay? So, all right. So, who's the original audience? That's very important. If it's a letter, then who did he write it to? And this is important for anything you read in the Bible. We learned this in Matthew 24 when Jesus is talking to his disciples and he says, you will see these things. We have to understand that to mean they would see these things, right? So we need to know who's he talking to. Who was this letter sent to, literally sent to? All right, the very next verse tells you, hey, I'm John, and I'm writing this to the 7 churches that are in Asia. 7 churches, and this is Asia Minor. Okay? So this is a letter with all this apocalyptic stuff with signs, and it's a prophecy, and you'll be blessed if you read it 7 times over. And it's going to go out to 7 churches in one area. Okay? Asia Minor is this one area there by the coast. Here's the churches. Okay? Now, John, we'll find out next week, he's on this little island right here that you can't even see because the title covered it up. But it's an island called Patmos. He says he's there because of the Word of God and the testimony of Jesus. He doesn't say he's in exile there. He just says he's there because of the gospel. So we'll talk about that more next week. Pretty much everybody in early church history said he was exiled there, so I'm going with that. But he also, it is an option. He could have just went there to preach the gospel. And then maybe he got imprisoned while he was there. Who knows? Anyway, pretty sure he was exiled. But so this little island right here, this is about maybe 60 miles from Ephesus. So he writes this letter while he's on this island. And we know there were mines there where you would exile somebody to work in the mine. The Roman Empire did this to Christians. We know that for sure. So while he's hanging out there, this is where he receives this word from the Lord, these visions. He's taken up in the spirit to see all these crazy things. So he's on Patmos, and the 7 churches are conveniently in this mail route that was a common mail route in the Roman Empire in that time. Okay, so if you were in Ephesus and you wanted to send a letter to Laodicea, now there was a road that cut straight across, but if the person needed to also go to these other places, they would take this route, and they would end up there. Make sense? Okay, remember, they're not driving, they're riding or walking, right? So I'm not sure what that was. Anyway, so you'll notice that in Revelation, when you get to chapter 2 in the 7 letters, when he's talking specifically to these 7 churches, or given specific instructions, they're in this order. They're in this exact order. So we're pretty sure this is how it went. because they're in that order in the book. Um, so, so here's why that's important. It's important for us to know the audience because these are 7 literal places that have literal groups of Christians. That's why we call them church, ecclesia, gathering of God's people, in each of these cities. And they're all going through stuff in the first century that John's speaking to. He's speaking into what's going on in these churches. Excuse me. Jesus is speaking to John and telling him to write these things down to these churches. Okay, so this has a first century context, and we have to start there before we start looking into the newspaper headlines today and trying to shove them into Revelation. Okay, so be careful with that. Let's just find out what was the first century context that he's writing into, because that's who he wrote it to. Okay, so Revelation was written to them back then, and we have it for us. We get to be blessed by reading it. Okay, but it's written to them for us. Make sense? Your entire Bible is that way, by the way. It's written to those people who first received it, but it was copied and distributed for us too. So we get to read it and we get to learn from it. Okay, so this is the context. Okay, and some of these are mentioned. Some of these cities are mentioned in other places in your Bible. Okay, so you can have fun, kind of hit the cross-reference little note in your Bible and chase it down. So that's the original audience. Now this next part is a little bit controversial. That's okay. It's going to be fine. The question is, okay, so we know he wrote to those churches, but when did he write this? Because it seems that it's important to know what was going on at the time when he wrote this. Might help us explain what he's saying in the book, right? We do this with every other book of the Bible. When did they write it? Helps us understand what was going on at the time. All of Paul's letters are written to churches that had specific things going on, and he's addressing those specific things. Revelation is a letter written to 7 churches addressing specific things. Okay? So the rules don't change when we're reading Revelation as a letter. Okay, so the question is, when did he write it? All right, there's 2 views, of course. With anything in Revelation, there's at least 2 views. At least. All right? There's 2 major views. There's probably more than 2. These are the most common. The first view is what is called the late date writing of Revelation. So this view says that John wrote Revelation in AD 95 or 96 during the reign of the Emperor Domitian. Okay, that is the most popular view today. Most of your study Bibles, if you have a study Bible and it kind of tells you like who wrote this book, when did he write it, most of them pick that date, the late date. The reason they arrive at that, and believe me, I've studied this way more than you want to. I actually read a 400-page book recently, which was someone's doctoral dissertation about what date the book was written. 400 and something pages on this. It was just riveting. And I would recommend it to you. It was very good. I would recommend it to you, but you have to know how to read some Greek because he just puts Greek in there and doesn't give you the English, so you kind of have to know what you're doing there. And trust me, you don't want to read it. So anyway, so I've read a lot on this, and the late date, as far as I can tell, is based solely on external evidence. Meaning, in order to arrive at the opinion that John was writing during Domitian's reign, you have to go reading things outside of the Bible to make that conclusion. Okay? Because it's not like John said, hey, it's me, John, to 7 churches, and I'm writing on April 2nd of AD, whatever. He doesn't tell us that, right? So you have to kind of figure it out. The late date's mostly based on external evidence. The early date is that John wrote Revelation in 64 or 65, maybe even 66, during the reign of Nero. Okay? Now, there are people in the 2nd century AD, church fathers, very respected people of that time, and you can find people on one side and on the other. Okay? Now, for me, I'll just tell you my view. My view is number 2. My view is that John is writing Revelation during the reign of Nero. We'll get into why I think that in more detail as we go throughout the book. But that's not just my view. There's just as many scholars that know their stuff on one side as there is the other. But the reason I picked this view is the internal evidence. There's certain things within the book of Revelation that point to that time period, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Also, the earliest handwritten copies of Revelation have a note at the very beginning that says, John wrote this while he was exiled by Nero to Patmos. The earliest copies say that. So there's some evidence there. There's a lot of external evidence. I don't put a lot of weight on external evidence because it's not the Bible. So I'm trying to draw my view from within the text itself. And I just think it supports number 2. And a lot of people think that. A lot of early Christians thought that too. So anyway, that's important because here's why that's important. Why would I waste time telling you that? If Revelation was written during the reign of Domitian, which means it was written after Jerusalem was destroyed, then that should tell you that these events are things in the future, none of which have took place yet. If it was written during the reign of Nero, before Jerusalem was destroyed, and just before Nero started persecuting Christians, then it would lead us to think that maybe some of these events in this book, not all of them, some of them happened during John's lifetime and the lifetime of the people at the 7 churches. Okay, so it is important which date you pick. Now, I don't think it matters all that much which one you pick. It's important if you want to really try to figure this thing out, if you're really interested in timelines and all that. But if you just want to be blessed by the book, just read it. It doesn't matter when he wrote it, okay? But if you're really trying to figure it out, the date kind of matters. Kind of matters what time period are we talking about here. Because if it was written during the reign of Nero, there are multiple things in Revelation that connect to that war that happened in Jerusalem. And it'll shock you how connected it is. That's mainly one of the reasons why I lean toward the early date. But like I said, I don't care which view you take. I'm not trying to convince you. I want to teach you how to read the book. That's what I'm concerned with. Make sense? Okay. All right. Let me give you. Let's see. What do we have after this? Okay. We're almost done. Let me give you some rules. All right. We love God's people have always loved rules, right? And we're so good at keeping them. Man, we're just like Israel. All right. So you're probably going to break all these, but here we go. 5 rules for reading Revelation. Do not read the visions literally. Immediately that makes some people uncomfortable because you have the wrong definition for literal. Literally means reading something according to its literature. That's what it means. So when you're reading these crazy visions, this book scares people when they think these things are going to literally happen exactly like they're being described. Okay, they think a monster with 7 heads is literally going to come out of the sea. That's not how we're supposed to read that. The monster coming out of the sea we're told, the angel tells John, that represents something. So we should not read these things literally, but they do refer and symbolize literal, actual things. Does that make sense? It's the sign thing, right? The sign's not the thing. The sign is telling you about the thing, and it's trying to point you to something, okay? So when you're reading these visions, just know you're reading apocalyptic visions. They're symbols. They're symbols of real things, but they're symbols, okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So that's rule number 1. 2, and this is so important, do not assume chronological order in Revelation. It is not in chronological order. It's not. It's just not. Okay? And I'll prove it to you. Just one example. When you start reading through Revelation, you're going to get into the visions, and the seals are going to be broken open, and then there's 7 of those, and there's 7 trumpets, and then there's 7 bowls that get poured out. God's wrath gets poured out of these bowls, 7 different ways. You're going to read through all that stuff, and it certainly looks like, wow, this is in chronological order, until you get to chapter 12, and it starts describing the birth of Jesus. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought we were going through the history timeline here, and you just stopped to point back at something that happened a long time ago. Okay, so that gives you a clue. This might not be in chronological order. Okay, so just remember that as you're reading through, don't assume everything's in chronological historical order. These are visions, which often are not in chronological order anywhere in your Bible. Sometimes they are, a lot of times they're not. Okay, make sense? All right. Do not assume a particular view. So if you've already got a view and you're 100% convinced that is the only way you can read Revelation, you're going to have a really hard time with this series, because I'm going to constantly tell you this. If you pick a view and then go to the Bible, you're probably going to miss some things, right? Because you're going to start looking to see if you can prove your view, and you'll misinterpret some things. Okay, so don't do that. What we want to do is read the Bible and let it tell us what to think. Number 4, read Revelation with humility. Please read this book with humility. Okay? If you think you know everything about Revelation, I love you. You don't. I don't. John didn't. You know how we know John didn't understand every single thing he wrote down in this book? Because people who knew him didn't understand parts of this book. If John knew everything, he could have just asked him, hey, John, what do you mean right here? I'm pretty sure a guy named Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, asked him those questions. And apparently John said, I wrote what I wrote. I'm with you, bud. Like, we're all in this together. This is just what he said. He didn't explain everything for me. You're going to see some things where the angel or God, he interprets something for him, but he often doesn't. Okay? So just be humble. We don't know everything. We just don't. The Bible is, here's what the Bible is. The Bible is Jewish meditation literature. It's mostly written by Jews. There's a couple things in the New Testament written by non-Jews. Luke and Acts would be good examples of that. But for the most part, it was written by Jews. And who wrote the Old Testament? Some Jewish people. And what do we learn about the Old Testament and all the Old Testament stuff we've done? You have to just read and meditate on it, and you'll just keep finding stuff, and you'll keep seeing things. Oh, wow, I didn't notice this last time. Or I missed this the last time I read this. Or, I noticed that last time, but now I'm seeing something new here. Do you know why that happens in your Bible? A couple reasons. One, it's alive. It's living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword. That's what Hebrews tells us, Hebrews 4:12. That's one reason. The other reason is God led these authors to write that way. To write in a way that makes you have to read it more than once. Right? So people say, well, I read the whole Bible. So? How many times did you read it? That's my question. Because I'm still finding stuff in chapter 1 of this book, this particular book, and I'm telling you, I have done a lot of work on it. And I'm still finding stuff that I missed. Okay? So it's designed to be read over and over again, which means you're not going to get everything the first time. Be humble. That was a long way of saying, calm down, be humble. Okay? And number 5, and this is a big deal. There are things in Revelation that is very literal language and very clear. Okay? Use those to help you understand the things that aren't very clear. Now, here's what we do at Revelation. Okay, this is what I did as a kid when I was growing up in the youth group and stuff. I would go to the juicy passages, and I'd start there, like the beast, Dun, 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 right? And there's two whole chapters that talk about this beast. They're the same beast, but they're in two different chapters. Um, and the more you read, it's like, wow, this is exciting. Who is this? What is it? What does that represent? You start there, and if you're not careful, you'll get tied up in that stuff and miss all the stuff that's really clear. Like, blessed is the one who overcomes. Okay, that's pretty clear and literal. So don't miss that because you're, hanging out with the beast all the time. And you're not really supposed to hang out with him. Okay. All right, it's time to end. All right. So anyway, there are things that are clear. All right, and they're clear language. They're words that we know, we understand. They're used other places in the Bible, and it's obvious what they mean every time in the Bible. Use that to help you kind of understand the things that aren't so clear. Okay, make sense? Those are our 5 rules. Okay, so let me tell you the goal of this study, and then I think that's all for tonight. And there's much more in your notes that I probably skipped over because I didn't want to keep you here all night. All right, so let's talk about the goal and we'll be done. Studying Revelation often leads to debate and division about which view is correct about the end of the world. Yeah? That's a true statement? Okay, that's not the goal of this study. I'm just not interested in that. Okay, I don't think the book is interested in that. First of all, it doesn't start with the end of the world by Jesus Christ. It starts with, I'm about to tell you something about me. You'll be blessed if you read this. Okay? So we're not going to get into all that. That's not going to be the focus here. That might be disappointing to you if you're like an end of the world junkie. I'm sorry. I mean, we can have some great conversations about it, but I don't want to teach all of us about that and whoever watches this online, all 4 of them. So that's not the goal. Here's going to be our goal. I'm stealing my goal from Revelation's goal. All right? Revelation's goal is to reveal Jesus as the king of a kingdom who are more than conquerors. That's bad English, isn't it? That's on purpose. The Revelation's goal is to reveal Jesus as the king of a kingdom who are more than conquerors. Because the kingdom is us. It's right there in chapter 1. He has made us a kingdom. He didn't say he has made a kingdom for us. He has made us a kingdom of priests. Right there in chapter 1. And he's not making that up. He got it from the Old Testament. It's been the plan all along. Right? So the goal of this study is to learn more about the king of the kingdom which we are. And the book tells us we can overcome. No matter what's happening. No matter how bad it gets, we're more than conquerors. Where do you think that goal comes from? Where does John's goal come from? It comes from something Jesus told him. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart. Which means, it doesn't mean hold your heart. It means take courage and be faithful because he has already overcome the world. In this world, you're going to have trouble. But he has already overcome, and he's made us a kingdom who also overcome. That's pretty good, isn't it? That was, in my opinion, that was worth coming for. All right? That's what we're going to talk about in this series, because that's what this book is about. It's about the king who's made a kingdom that's like a mustard seed that he planted in the first century, and it's been growing. And it's a really small seed at first, but it's been growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, so big that birds come and light in the tree. Isn't it funny how Jesus described the kingdom like a tree? That tree thing keeps coming up, doesn't it? Keeps coming up, that's funny. All right, so he says, this kingdom I've planted, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. And it's going to overcome, and not even hell has got a chance against it. Yeah? All right, so that's what Revelation's about. That's what we're going to focus on. We're not getting tied up with whether Russia is part of Revelation. Russia's not in there. Okay? The word Russia is not in your Bible anywhere. I know some people say it's in Ezekiel. It's not. It's just not. Okay, so we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is focus on the king, because that's what the first three words said the book was about. Yeah? We good? All right, let me give you some homework, and then we'll stop and have some Q&A time, and if there's no questions, then we'll just completely be done, and y'all can hang out like we usually do. All right, here's your homework. I want you to read Revelation chapter 1 more than once. I'm going to raise the bar a little bit. I want you to read Revelation chapter 1 more than 3 times. Okay? But there's no limit. You can read it as much as you want. But at least 3 times. It's short. It's not that bad. The reason why I want you to do it more than once is because the more you read it, the more you're going to notice. Because it's Jewish meditation literature that's designed and alive to work this way. So read chapter 1 several times. And I just want you to ask some questions as you're doing that. Okay? When does John say these events will occur? I'm not asking you for a date. There's no dates. There's never a date. Okay? But what does he seem to be saying about how much time is going to pass before these things happen? Okay? Just look at what he says. We're going to talk about it when we come back. Compare Revelation 1:7, which is John's theme. He says this is the theme of the book. He doesn't use the word theme, but if you're reading it in Greek, you would get very clear this is the theme. Chapter 1, verse 7. Compare that to Matthew 24:30 through 34. Just read it in Revelation and then go to Matthew. And just go back and forth. So, what are we supposed to get? I don't know. Try it. See what you get. See what God might say to you while you're doing that. I'm trying to get you to do what I do. That's the goal here. Read them both side by side. Does John describe, so I want you to ask this question and try to answer it. Does John describe the tribulation and the kingdom in past, present, or future terms? So just ask that question as you read it. Okay? He's going to mention tribulation and kingdom in chapter 1. Just pay attention to what he's saying about tribulation and kingdom. All right? I'm not trying to sway you a certain way. I'm just telling you these are questions you want to ask. These are the questions the 7 churches, when somebody showed up in Ephesus and said, John wrote us a letter. We just got a letter. Okay? That somebody showed up in these 7 churches and said, hey, remember John? You know, he's been on Patmos. He wrote us something. What questions would you be asking if you were a first century Christian in Ephesus under persecution? What questions would you ask? That's what I want you to start doing. Okay? And then the first vision, the vision of Jesus, the vision of the Son of Man, there's some symbols and stuff in there. So I want you to read that, and Jesus interprets the symbols. You're going to really like this, especially later in Revelation when he doesn't do that for you. You're going to really like this first vision, okay? Because he takes the cookies off the top shelf 3 miles up there, and he like hands them to you. Like, here's what this means, okay? So when you read that, I want you to ask, what does that teach us about how we're supposed to read this book? How are we supposed to read visions if Jesus interpreted the first one for him? Okay, just do that. It's going to teach, you'll see when you do it. Okay, this is how visions work. What you're seeing is not actually what's happening. It represents something that's happening. Okay? So that's your homework. Do those things. I'll post them. Hopefully we'll remember to post that to remind you of it sometime during the week. So we're really going to dig into Revelation chapter 1 next week. And Revelation chapter 1 is going to teach us how to read the rest of the book, because that's what John does when he writes stuff. Okay? All right. Questions? Yep. Great question. Really, I was hoping someone would ask about this. The reading aloud thing is huge in the first century. Because when you went to church in the first century, I put it in quotes because they never would have said we're going to church. They just thought they were the church. They would say, we're gathering, we're ecclesiaing, you know. Anyway, different sermon. Um, when they got together, they didn't do, our church services don't look like theirs. Okay, so what they would do is they would gather in a home. They didn't have their own building. So they would gather in a home, and some of the homes we found actually have walls that had been torn down. It's clear they made a bigger room because their church was growing. It's pretty cool. Peter's house, by the way, is like that. So they would come into a room, and someone would read scripture aloud. All right, and it could be various things, and then they would sit around and just discuss it. So the reading aloud was a big deal. So imagine this. Have you ever read you ever read Romans, Paul's letter to the Romans? It's long. I think it's 16 chapters. It's long and it's dense. There's a lot in there. If you ever read Romans again, please do. Just imagine a woman named Phoebe, who's mentioned at the end of the book, who most likely is the one who did this. Imagine a woman named Phoebe reading that letter start to finish. And that was church that day. You think I'm long-winded. So the reading aloud was part of their service. So, I mean, we do it too. I mean, I read scripture aloud, but I don't read like all of Ephesians. All right? So imagine this. You're a first century Christian in Ephesus or Sardis or Smyrna or Laodicea or one of those churches in the first century, and you find out we just got a letter, right? And someone stands up that Sunday and reads the entire book of Revelation. That's how they would have done it. Imagine listening to that book. And you can do this, because you'd be blessed if you do. Literally. Just get on your YouVersion app and let it read to you. And just listen to the book of Revelation. I have a friend who did this. He actually went out by his pond at night when stars were out, and he read the entire book of Revelation out loud to himself, by himself in the woods. Because he read verse 3, and it said, you're blessed if you read this out loud. So he was like, well, that's pretty clear. There's a lot of stuff in here that's not clear, but that is. So he read the whole book to himself, and he got to the end, and he's like, I think I get it. To which I was like, you're the first person that's ever said that, right? I think I get it. He said, you really need to be on Jesus' team. I was like, yes, that's the point, right? So reading aloud was part of their whole tradition. So we could take that as we would be blessed if we read the whole book out loud in one sitting. Here, not going to. I mean, we might. Who knows? It takes you about an hour, between 50 and 60 minutes, to read it straight through. So there's that. But so that was part of how they did it. So that's kind of the whole idea behind reading it aloud. So that was a long answer. I'll try not to make my answer so long. Mm-hmm. You don't know how you made me so excited when you said I looked up all the other occurrences. I'm like, oh, yes, that's what I want you to do. I want to make you a Bible nerd. That's really what. Actually, I really want to make you love Jesus, but that this is included, So I really want you to do that. That's very important. That word sign, just look it up. See what it says everywhere else. Yeah, go ahead. No, no, we don't. I don't, for sure. Um, yeah, external evidence says John died of old age in Ephesus. But like I said, that's all external, and any of that stuff you just kind of say, well, that could be or could not be true. Church history is a wonderful thing, but you kind of have to take it as you take all history. The writer could be biased. The writer could have bad information. You know. Yeah, that's if you I don't know if anybody has a study Bible with them, but it's most of the ones I've ever bought take the late date view. But your point is important because a lot of the scholars that I've read say it's kind of unlikely that you would banish a man that old to a salt mine. He couldn't do anything, you know. So I mean that's one argument, but like I said, this is all external stuff. So yeah, if he wrote it between 95 and 96, he's a pretty old fella. So all right, I'm gonna pray for us. If you want to stay after and hang out, stay here as long as you want to. Okay, let's pray.